universities. My name is Molly, and I work with LittleCIS, one of the groups together with dissenters that's organizing this webinar today. We also have Derek on from LittleCIS, who's going to be running us through some research tips and tricks over the next hour or so. A couple things real quick. So there's a chat that people can chat in. Feel free to introduce yourself, what school you're from or what city. And also if there's particular questions that you're hoping to get answered today, feel free to put them in there, both so that we can kind of have a sense of what people are interested in, and also so that afterwards, if questions don't get answered, we can think about ways to address them. I'm going to hand it over to Angel from Dissenters real quick, but first, also, if people have specific questions as we're going through how to do research, please put them in the Q&A function, not the chat function. And that way, Manira and Jin from LittleCIS, who are looking on the back end, will hold your questions. We're going to go about an hour today, but we have some time to stay on afterwards for a Q&A. So if you have questions, put them there and we'll try to address them. And then there are going to be some slides today. It's going to be mostly live demoing research tools, but we will share the slides with you if you registered, as well as a recording. So we're recording today. We'll send out the recording if you want to share it with other people from your groups or reference it for research needs. And I think the one other thing I wanted to say before handing it over to Angel is just, yeah, we're from LittleCIS. We are called LittleCIS because we're the opposite of Big Brother. We do investigative research about corporations and billionaires and powerful people. So that's why we're here today in this really important historical moment that I think Angel's gonna frame for us a little bit more. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Molly. And what's up, y'all? My name is Angel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Dissenters. Some of y'all may know me. I'm so excited to be on this call. Y'all, we have almost 200 people on this call, and I'm seeing some familiar faces. I'm seeing some names from our 101. I'm seeing some of our students. What's up? Shout out Ziora. Shout out Link, Noor, Fatima. I recognize y'all's names. We're so excited to have y'all on our call today. As y'all know, a lot of us are organizing right now around specifically what's going on in Palestine. The indiscriminate bombing campaign that's happening, the use of chemical weapons, the targeting of schools, hospitals, refugee camps. The occupation right now is really going mask off, right? Cutting off access to basic survival needs, cutting off access to water, fuel, electricity. And it's important to name, right, that this is all funded by the United States, right? By our government, by our institutions. Every single bomb that Israel drops on Gaza, our universities bankroll, right? Through these massive investments that they have in the world's largest arms manufacturers, right? So that's Boeing, that's Lockheed Martin, that's Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Elbit Systems, right? Our universities prop up these war profiteers by putting their endowments and investments, right, money that we give them directly into the pockets of these corporations and these war criminals. And not only that, right, many of our universities invest in militarism through research grants and partnerships, recruitment partnerships, campus policing, right, study abroad programs. Our universities are perpetrators of US imperialism. Like, do not get that twisted. And research is so vital to mounting these campaigns. So at Dissenters, we really push divest from death campaigns. And these are campaigns that essentially demand universities divest, whether it's their money or whether it's these partnerships, divest from the war machine, from these war profiteers, from these weapons corporations, right? And research is important because it helps us pinpoint our targets, and it also helps us determine like which tactics are most effective to push our target toward our demands. So And we've been supporting these campaigns since our arrival on college campuses just a couple years ago. Dissenters especially uses creative direct action to mount pressure on our university targets. But we know that these actions need to be strategic, right? Actions need to build upon each other. Actions need to have clear goals. Actions need to elicit a reaction from our target. They need to be targeted, right? So we are super, super excited to bring this training to y'all, our members, our community. Folks have been really getting busy, throwing down, building momentum. Some folks diverse campaigns are gaining more momentum than they have just in the last few years, right? And our friends at LittleCIS are here to support us in being strategic. So I just wanted to offer like a little framing. Again, we're so excited to see so many of y'all on this call, and especially to see so many familiar faces in this moment. And I'm going to pass it back to Little Sis to get us started. But just know research is key, right? There's no direct actions without strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angel. That was really helpful in orienting what we're gonna do today and why we're doing it. So I'm going to hand it over to Derek in a sec, but just so people have a little bit of sense of where we're going today, we're going to talk about three main things. One is just like, how do I identify who the top weapons companies are and how they're involved in Israel's war on Gaza? Then we're going to talk about how you figure out who leads those companies, who's invested in those companies, what kind of banks and other Wall Street entities prop them up and help them do business. And then we'll really spend a bulk of the time going into how you then figure out what your school's ties to weapons companies are, in a whole bunch of different ways that Angel was just starting to talk about. Like, are they invested in weapons companies? Do they have contracts with them? Do they have big donors that are weapons company leaders? Are there weapons company executives on their board of trustees? And we'll dig into that. So I just wanted to say also at the top, if people, I'm sure here, have done this research, have skills, have done partial research, have done a lot of research, feel free to throw things in the chat. One of the things about research that can be exciting, but also sometimes frustrating, is that there's often multiple ways to get to answers. So we're gonna share some kind of like tried and true methods that we like to use, but there's always different ways to do stuff as well. And yeah, to use your kind of research and organizing creativity brains. So I'm going to throw it to Derek and stop sharing my screen. He's going to start us off with how to identify top weapons companies.
Hey everyone, really excited to be here with everyone. It's so exciting to see so many people here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Let me back a little bit. Yeah, so I guess first things first, I wanted to just offer some resources around like how to actually identify who some of the big weapons companies are. And I'm going to mention a few other things, but today throughout, we're really going to focus when we're using examples sort of on the big kind of conventional defense and weapons companies, the Lockheed Martins and the Raytheons. But I do want to stress that we're just doing that for the sake of kind of, keeping things somewhat simple today. But of course, you have all kinds of sort of corporate actors that are involved in militarism, whether it's tech, whether it's smaller weapons producers, facial recognition software, and so on and so on. And so, I would urge you to, sort of widen your scope as you're thinking about these things. But, one really sort of handy and authoritative resource to look at is the Defense News Top 100 list. Defense News is basically just like this kind of go-to industry website and news source, right? And they publish this top 100 list. And all of this data that you see here, I'll scroll down in a second. All this data that you see here is really authoritative data. It's like based on the company filings, like it's legit. And it has really kind of handy rankings in terms of like who the big defense companies are, where they're, what country they're headquartered in, how much revenue they make, and then how much of that is from, defense, right? So who their CEO is. So it's just really helpful. And it's kind of can be a good starting point for like trying to find who the big players are. And then from there, researching them in combination with other things that you want to figure out, like, are they shipping weapons to Israel, right? I'm gonna go away from there and just one thing I wanted to do was mention a super useful resource. I can't stress enough how useful this resource is if you're investigating weapons companies, not just weapons companies, other companies too. But it's this resource that the American Defense Service Committee put together called the Investigate Database. And as you can see, it's just investigate.afsc.org, and I think we might be hearing from them in a little bit. But basically, I'm going to come back to this probably again today, but you can, they have this database of companies, and if you put one of those weapon companies, I'll put all here, here's Lockheed Martin, it takes you to a profile, and they have hundreds of companies listed here. And it has basically like these profiles with different things that you can click on. Here, war crimes against Palestinian civilians. And it just has a lot of information about that specific company's ties to, occupation and oppression, Palestinians, and what weapons involved in that. And so it's just really super useful. Like I use this a lot when I'm, doing things. So you can also, if you want to just like see all the companies, you click view all companies, right? And it's just a long list of all the different companies. And again, it's not just, sort of, the occupation. You can also look around the U.S.-Mexico border, prisons, things like that. There's a whole host of things that are really useful. So definitely recommend making use of that. Once you find that company that you're interested in, maybe looking it up on that database. Just to mention one example of the other resources that I was talking about that go beyond the sort of conventional weapon companies, there's a great microsite called No Tech for Apartheid, and there's all kinds of resources tied to it that talks about how companies, for example, like Google and Amazon, have been, complicit in profiting from the occupation. So really, there's so many things you can make use of. Maybe folks know of some that they want to, throw into the chat, but so that's kind of a starting point, trying to find these things, right? The only other thing I'd recommend is really kind of keeping up on, just new news articles that come out, new reports that come out. Pretty much anytime if you search terms like whatever, like U.S.-Israel weapons contract sales, you'll find things that come out. Recently, for example, the journalist Ken Klippenstein, published this leaked list of weapons U.S. secretly sent to Israel, right? Where it gives you lists of weapons that you can then, start to, connect to, you look up the weapons and research them and the companies that are producing them and so on. So you can really start to connect the dots. And then finally, I should say that, LittleCIS published an article a couple of weeks ago called Corporate Enablers of Israel's War on Gaza, that has, make some of these connections as well. So that could also be a starting point. But yeah, I mean, so that's kind of how some ways to get started in trying to locate, like, who are some of these weapons companies, right? That you wanna, start to do research on. And I think I'll stop sharing now and pass it back to you, Molly.
Cool. Thank you, Derek. Yeah, so like I mentioned, in a couple of minutes, we're gonna really get into universities' ties to these weapons manufacturers. And once you've looked at those lists, you'll have a sense of them and kind of be able to recognize their names. The other thing that we wanted to talk about briefly first, and I'm gonna share slides on, is when you're starting to think about these weapons companies and think about what kinds of strategic action you can take targeting them, one thing that's really important to figure out and understand is like who actually makes up these weapons companies, who makes decisions for them, who props them up, and start thinking about, not just Lockheed Martin as like one kind of like impenetrable entity, but really like who are the actual people and also like other corporations that are making decisions for them and allow Lockheed Martin to carry out their business day to day. And so there's kind of 4 categories that we think are important for you all to think about in particular. So probably a lot of these people are familiar with what they mean, but I'm just gonna run through it real quick. One is like, who are the executives of these war profiteering companies? Who's the chief executive officer? Who's the chief financial officer? Who are like high ranking officials? And those are the people who are going to be making kind of like day-to-day decisions for the company. And oftentimes those people are very powerful. They're very wealthy. They sit on boards of universities or research centers that are connected to universities or hospitals that are connected to universities as individuals, as well as on the boards of other corporations. Also, it's important, especially for these companies, most of the ones that we're going to talk about today are publicly traded companies, which means they are owned by shareholders. And public companies have boards of directors. It's usually a group of like 5 to 10 directors, and they're elected by their shareholders and are kind of responsible not for the day-to-day decision making in the company, but for the overall management, to set strategy, and to basically make sure the company makes as much profit as possible. And they are technically in charge of those executives. So if you think about a company like, and the kind of decision tree of who's in charge, the board of directors are really at the top. And those are, again, oftentimes very powerful people, wealthy people, oftentimes people from other corporations, that are high ranking. The other kind of category that we're going to talk about is shareholders. So like I was just mentioning, a lot of these companies are public. That means that they have shareholders that own them. So that would be a person or a company or an institution that owns stock in the company, and that make profits or paid dividends based on if the company's making profits. And we'll talk about some of who those typical shareholders tend to be. Those are another kind of category of people that can be pressured around these corporations. And then the last one that we're also going to talk about is banks and other financiers. So oftentimes these companies, again, they're huge, they need financing. Even though they're making a lot of profit, they borrow money from financial institutions that are oftentimes big banks whose names you guys will recognize. And then banks make money off that lending in different ways. So we'll talk also about how to identify that. And I think one thing to keep in mind for a lot of this is that when you're thinking particularly about your universities and targets that you can pressure, many of your schools will have direct ties to weapons manufacturers, CEOs, board of directors, etc. Some of them might not, but they might have ties to like a bank that finances these weapons manufacturers, or shareholders that own these weapons manufacturers. And so it's kind of a thing to figure out for your context in particular. So I'm going to now just like demo how you find these different pieces of information for a company. And we'll go ahead and share my screen so that people can see that. 1 second. Okay, so people should just see Google up right now. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is just how to identify, again, using Lockheed Martin as our example, who are the executives and the board of trustees of a company. And for big companies, this should be usually pretty easy. Oftentimes, their official websites, they'll list out who the individuals are. So I'm just going to go to Lockheed Martin, Google it, go to their official website, and then you'll see there's a tab that says who we are. And there'll be lots of little tabs under here. There usually will be one that says leadership and governance. You can click on that, and there'll be one that says executive leadership team, as well as board of directors. So we can open up both of those. And this here will show you the executive leadership team, like their CEO here, this guy, Jim Takelet, I don't know how you say his last name. And usually there will be little biographies that are here. And so this is like kind of like step number one in researching these guys is looking at their official biographies. Usually at the end, there'll be like a bunch of stuff about why they're, qualified to do their job. And then at the end, there will be usually a paragraph that talks about their board relationships, what kind of trade groups, lobbying groups, or other kinds of cultural institutions or universities they're on the board of. So you can see this guy, for example, serves on the board of trustees of a hospital, I think in Massachusetts. Sometimes they'll be listing here like what universities they have ties with in different ways, not always. And we're going to talk more about how to find that in a sec. It's also worth seeing what schools these people graduated from. So for example, he went to Princeton, and that was maybe something that then you would want to Google his name and Princeton to be like, is he a big donor to Princeton? So that's like a really great first place to look. You can look at their LinkedIn profile. Also, sometimes there are stuff there that might show you what schools they have ties to. And then you can also do the same thing basically for board members here. Again, we have this list. They really all kind of very strikingly look alike in this example on this page. So we have all these different board members. So these are basically like the CEO's boss, the people that are in charge of decision making on a big scale for the company. It'll tell you where they work currently or where they used to work. And you can click here and they'll have similar biographies. So for example, here's someone we're going to look at in a little bit. And similarly, they usually won't be as detailed, but they'll have kind of like, here's groups they're a part of, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way to find that. Most of the time for these big companies, you're going to be able, hold on one second. My dog was crying. Okay. So most of the time for these big companies, you're going to be able to find that on their website, but sometimes you won't. And there's a more kind of like direct way or publicly accessible way to do that. And that has to do with filing. So there is an entity that I'm sure many people have heard of called the Securities and Exchange Commission that regulates corporations in this country. And public companies are required to file certain disclosures with the Securities and Exchange Commission that then we all can search. So if you go to Google Securities and Exchange Commission Edgar is the name of the database where you can search all the filings. It'll take you to a page like this, and then you can search for Lockheed Martin or any other weapons company that's publicly traded. There's different ways to search. I usually use this one, which is like by their ticker symbol right here. So you can Google what the company's ticker symbol is. Lockheed Martin is LMT. So I'm going to put that in here. I can see Lockheed Martin Corporation. And it's going to take me to a screen like this that shows you all different kinds of disclosures for corporations. And we could do a whole training on this. There's lots of information that's accessible here, but one of the really useful forms that they have to disclose is called a proxy statement or a Def 14A, which is basically a big long document. I'm going to click on it here. That looks like this. That every year companies have a shareholder meeting. You'll see here that many of them have gone virtual since COVID. And their shareholders get to vote on things which are in this document. And there's like a ton of information in here, including who the board members are, information about them, as well as a couple other things, which I'm going to show you. So it's a big document like this. So the table of contents is really going to be kind of like your best friend. And you'll see here, there's a part that says election of directors. You can go to director nominees. And it's again going to show oftentimes a little bit more detailed biographies of all these board members. And you can start to kind of map out who they are, look for names, look for affiliations. There are often going to be people who also have connections to other companies. For example, like this woman who's on the board of Lockheed Martin is also the CEO of a big fossil fuel company, Occidental Petroleum Corporation. So this is a place to go. Basically, if you try to check for your company and they don't have it on the main website, you can do that there. You can also see here the compensation that different executives and board members make. So again, I would go to this table of contents. That's going to be your best friend here. There are two sections, executive compensation and director compensation. If I click executive compensation and then scroll down and basically be on the lookout for little charts that show how much people get paid, we're going to go down here to this table that says summary compensation table. And this is basically showing you how much these people made. So for example, the CEO of Lockheed Martin made $24 million last year alone. So that can be useful in thinking about messaging for campaigning and various other things. And they have a similar table for executives or for board members as well. And like I said before, oftentimes these people are powerful, so they have lots of different ties to lots of different institutions, whether it's as donors, whether it's as board members, etc. So that's kind of like a first place to go to understand who are the actual people that are human beings that are running these companies. The other things that I want to show people, thinking back to that slide of the different kind of stakeholders who are pressurable in these companies, is about shareholders. And so like I said, in the example of Lockheed Martin, it's a public company. That means they sell shares in the company. Like you as an individual could buy a share in Lockheed Martin, but most of the time, the people who are like the really big shareholders are very big money managers whose clients include your universities. And so you might want to figure out who are the biggest investors in these companies, who's making money off of them, who has the power to influence them. And I'm going to show you guys two quick ways to do that. One of them is also in the Def 14A/proxy statement. In the proxy statement, they're required to disclose anyone that owns more than 5% of the company. And by anyone, I mean like any entity. So you can see here, again, table of contents, security ownership of management and certain beneficial owners. If I click there, it's going to take me to this little table that's going to show of leadership in the company, individual people, how much stock do they own, which again, you could think about how this would be useful in actions and strategy and messaging and pressuring them. And then there's going to be a table that says security ownership of certain beneficial owners. And that's going to show you any entity that owns more than 5% of the company. So State Street Corporation, Vanguard Group, and BlackRock all own 14, 8, and 6 respectively % of Lockheed Martin. And people might be familiar with those names. They're big, giant asset managers that manage like trillions and trillions of dollars. So for many, many, many public companies, those are going to be among the top investors. And they manage that money on behalf of their clients, which include giant pension funds and endowments of universities, which we're going to talk more about. Derek's going to show you how to kind of like untangle the thread there. So that's one way of finding that. The other resource that we wanted to show for people is called whalewisdom.com, which is very helpful in that it kind of compiles another SEC filing that's called a 13F, that shows you kind of all of the investors, not just the ones that are over 5%. And you can search it by stock again. So LMT again, you see Lockheed Martin up here. Click that and it's going to bring you down to this little chart. So these are, as of now, the firms that own parts of Lockheed Martin. And you can search it. Most of the time what I do is sort it by ownership percentage, because that's going to show you who owns the most. So again, we have State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock because those are more than 5%. But there are also all these other entities that own various percents. Some of which can be, you know, quite small, but there is a connection there and could be something to think about. So that's how you find shareholders. The last thing I want to show people is about financing relationships. So there's these shareholders that are oftentimes these big asset managers. There are also banks that have relationships with these weapons companies that lend money to them, oftentimes for expansion. And there's a couple of different ways to do that, again, that we can share more about in the Q&A, one of which is to use SEC filings. But a lot of times what is kind of the quickest and might be what you guys more need is to just like do some creative Google searches. So I would search like Lockheed Martin, and then the term credit agreement is kind of like the magic phrase that you're looking for there, putting them in quotes, and then it's going to bring you this agreement through Edgar again, which is a $3 billion credit agreement between this group of banks and Lockheed Martin. And you could read this more to understand the terms of it. It's again very long and a lot of boilerplate language, but you can kind of figure out what's important. There'll be a list at the end of the lenders. And so this is basically saying that this group of banks as lenders and then playing different roles in the deal are extending $3 billion to Lockheed Martin in a revolving credit line, which is almost like a credit card for a corporation, basically, is the way to think about it. So again, in thinking about your campaigns, you could think about like, maybe there's not, the CEO of Lockheed Martin isn't on your board, but there's a good chance that executives from some of these banks have relationships to your universities and could also be pressured. So I think that's, oh, and then I also do want to just quickly show, I would be remiss not to show it, our database at LittleCIS, which again could be a whole training, and we'll let you guys know how to do that, is called LittleCIS.org, and it is an involuntary Facebook of the 1% that is collaborative and open source and tracks a lot of these relationships in these like handy profiles. So for example, the one of Lockheed Martin looks like this and can also be a really good place to start in particular. Usually when I'm looking at one of these companies, I'll go to LittleCIS first, see what's here to get me started. So yeah, I think that's all I have on this section. I'm going to throw it to Derek to get into the university stuff now that you guys have a sense of how these companies are composed. And I will stop.
Cool. All right. Yeah, now we're going to really get into like, how do you take the, these weapons companies, the sort of kind of network or structure behind them and the different parts of them, and start trying to research those connections to your university. We're going to start in with stuff that's more fairly like intuitive and simple, and then move into a couple of things that are a little more in the weeds. So stay with me, everyone. But people are asking questions about like, how do you research funds and this and that. We'll talk a little bit about that, and I have some helpful advice for you. So I guess first and foremost, the places to start, one good place to start is looking at the boards of trustees of your university, and not just the university boards of trustees. I mean, that's what I'm going to mostly look at right now. But also look at the boards of trustees or the whatever governing boards they have for things like business schools or schools maybe associated with the sciences, right? That might be tied to weapons research. And then also the boards of trustees of the defense companies and their corporate leaderships as well. So I'm just going to give you like a few examples, right? This is going to take us to the the trustees of Columbia University, right? If you might remember that Molly was just showing Lockheed Martin, and that Lockheed Martin has on its board Jay Johnson, right? Jay Johnson is also on the board of trustees of Columbia University, right? And it says loud and clear right here, Johnson is on the board of director of Lockheed Martin, right? Interestingly, Johnson is also, this is just worth pointing out, Johnson is someone who regularly goes on the news and sort of, in one way or another echoes militarist talking points, but never discloses the fact that he is personally profiting hundreds of thousands of dollars every year through weapons sales tied to war, right? He's also a big partner at a big law firm that defends ExxonMobil and other things. But anyways, that's beside the point. Once you start digging into this, you'll find all kinds of things, right? So just another example here also is looking at NYU, right? And this is sort of a different part of the weapons company power structure, right? Here's NYU's board. If you were to dig into this a little bit, you would notice that the vice chair of the board, Larry Fink, is the chairman and CEO of BlackRock. Now, Molly was just talking about those asset managers. BlackRock's the biggest asset manager in the world. So, right here is the person who runs the firm that is, one of the top shareholders in virtually every weapons company, right? And I actually, I saw some people trickling in that were from Northwestern. Congrats to Northwestern grad students on winning your union, by the way. And so I did some just really quick Googling, right? And so I looked at the trustees of Northwestern. And one of the things that I noticed was, almost right away, is that one of the trustees, and this is just one example, you could probably find a ton more on this board of trustees, is the president and CEO for State Street Global Advisors. That's like an arm of State Street, right? Now, you remember State Street was I think it was like 14 and change % owner of Lockheed Martin. And if you go, look at State Street's leadership page, you will, see her on it right there. Maybe it'll say that she's on the board of Northwestern. Let's see. Maybe it won't. I don't know. Oh yeah. Well, no, it mentions Northwestern, that she's an alum, but not the board. In any event, Northwestern has her on their page. So once you start looking around, and also as you're thinking about the weapons company's power structure more broadly, like Molly said, you'll start to find all types of connections. You can also look at the companies themselves, right? So here's Northrop Grumman. Also, I don't find these things this easily. I don't want anybody to lose morale or anything. This is just stuff that I looked at beforehand so I could get to them quickly. So don't despair. If you so a lot of this stuff takes time, but it's also kind of fun too, and you learn a lot in the process. But Northrop Grumman has a board member, for example. Where is he? Here, Gary Roughhead. And he's former Navy. He is on a trustee of John Hopkins University. And if we just go, Google or search trustee of, let's see if I can do this here. Hold on. I'm just going to do Johns Hopkins trustees. Because you always want to confirm it, because it might say that on someone's page that they are a trustee of this or that, but sometimes these people don't update their pages for a couple of years. So you always want to make sure you try to get real confirmation, because if you're going into organizing and you're doing a serious public action, you want to make sure your information is 100. You want to get it confirmed. Otherwise you could get discredited, right? So you want to just make sure that. But oh wait, this is the public health school. But hold on, let me find just trustees, Johns Hopkins University board. Well, let's see here. There we go. Trustees. Okay. Internet is going slow, but here he is right here, Gary Roughhead. Okay. So confirmed. And that was just something that I just found, when I saw people trickling in that were from Northwestern, right? Similarly, here's another one with Raytheon, right? Now here, again, looking at, you could look at the board of directors, you could look at the executives. I'm going to go to this guy right here, Brian Rogers. And interestingly, you go down here and it says he's on the board of trustees of Johns Hopkins Medicine, but, the big hospital, that's sort of kind of connected to Johns Hopkins. But he's also on the board of directors of the Harvard Management Company. The Harvard Management Company is the entity that sort of oversees Harvard endowment. So I already checked it out. I'm not going to do it right now to save time, but suffice to say, trust me, if you go look at Harvard Management Company, you'll see his name as a member of the board of the Harvard Management Company. So yeah, you just start looking at these profiles. And sometimes there isn't stuff on the pages, right? Because they don't include everything. So it's always worthwhile to do a quick search of someone to go a little further in your research, right? Again, it takes a little time, but especially if you do it as groups, it's kind of fun, put together a spreadsheet, just start putting all the pieces together, right? That's an initial way to kind of start off, right? I also want to give another sort of pro tip. This isn't something that I'm going to dig into right now. This is actually something that I'm just going to sort of, pass on and say, this is a good way to kind of start to research things. But it's site searches, right? So basically, there are ways to search university websites or specific programs in universities that are called site searches that basically let you look for a search term that is any given search term on that entire sort of all the pages of that website, right? So here's what I mean, right? I'm going to go to stanford.edu. So here's Stanford's, general website, right? Now I'm going to do the search operator. It's site like that. So do that, and then I'm going to put in parentheses Lockheed Martin. Whoops. Here. Now, when I hit enter, what's going to happen here is that you're going to get every single, mention of Lockheed Martin on Stanford's website that the internet pulls up, right? Now, I want to stress it's not going to be from like the Stanford Business School, because that might have like a different like originating page, right? But this is for stanford.edu, right? And so you just immediately see, right? There's different things. Like here's Industrial Affiliates Program. Let's click on that. The Industrial Affiliates Program for the Department of Aeronautics and Astronauts at Stanford was established in 1959. These are different, corporate affiliates that they have. Boeing, Lockheed, a bunch of them. We were lucky. That pops right up. Sometimes you'll be pages and pages, and you'll be kind of looking around. It might help you find examples of like university researchers that are being funded by these companies and so on and so on. But again, that's something you really got to do some digging with and sort of play around with. It's the same sort of thing with donors, right? Like there are definitely people tied to weapons companies that make donations, that make big donations to weapons, to universities. And there's no sort of, tried and true way to find those. It just takes a lot of work, a lot of kind of obsessive search combinations and creative ways of searching things out. Malia just mentioned one by looking at people's where they're alumni of, right? But you can also just do things like here's a Lockheed Martin donation university higher ed. Again, this is pretty intuitive stuff, right? And for example, this takes us to this page. This is from 2001, granted, so you don't want to use this, but it's just an example of the types of things that can pop up, right? Lockheed Martin donations to like different colleges, right? Different universities. So yeah, just like different kinds of like Google combinations can be helpful. I want to show you one other thing, right? Weapons companies often have giving pages, right? Basically, it's their philanthropic arms where they devote, whatever, like a few $1 million every year to make themselves look like they really, care about whales and children and ducks and things like that, right? And they're good corporate citizens, right? So you got to go to, you can Google, the name of the company and giving, different combinations you can also do. And you'll see things like, for example, here's Boeing, sort of like, talking about the different things it sponsors, right? Or how, if you want to apply to be sponsored by Boeing, you can do that. And you scroll through the pictures, they give different examples, different things. We won't go through them now, but these are things that you can research, right? Another thing you can do is add, I'm going to, do something here, right? Let me go back to this. Let's put Boeing giving into quotations, and then also put University of, right? So again, like these creative combinations, right? And then, it sends you to a bunch of different things, right? So the first thing here is, Boeing to sponsor the 100th WSU UW game, right? So, if you're in Washington State or Seattle or something, and Boeing has a big presence there, they're sponsoring games, maybe that's a good place to, show up, right? And so on and so on. So there's really kinds of like endless amounts of work and research and fun kind of digging that you can do into things like this, right? And again, I really urge you to kind of think expansively about the larger structure of these weapons companies, right? Not just the companies directly, you'll find a lot there, right? But also like, who are the powerful people up behind these companies, the directors, the top executives, the top shareholders, and so on, right? I want to just pivot now to something that I know people are really eager to find more info on. So again, stay with me here because this part is a little bit more in the weeds, right? The question is like, can we find out who our university is the endowment investments, both directly in different companies, but also indirectly through different funds, like what are they invested in? And the answer is yes, you can find with qualification, right? A lot of this info you can find out. Sometimes you can't, it sort of depends on the university and what's disclosed and how, and it's kind of hit or miss. But the good news is that you can often find a lot of this information. So I'll give you some examples. So first of all, particularly if you're at a public university, universities often disclose all, or I shouldn't say they often disclose all. They rarely disclose all, but sometimes or even often disclose parts of their investments, right? And one way to just kind of find this out is so universities have investment offices. This is where they'll typically publish these things, right? You can even call up an investment office and just ask them, right? Like say, do you have the portfolio of your investments that are published, right? But you can also just kind of do some searching and find it online. So for example, just in preparing for this, I did some searching of I put in search terms like, public university investment portfolios or something like that. And different ones came up. Here's University of Washington, right? And again, this is on their sort of like endowment investment page, right? And they have different reports. Some of these don't have a lot of info. Some of these have more info. But if you go down here, this is their most recent, they call it their private investment disclosure. And it sounds like it's something that they probably have to disclose because of some like state regulation, right? And if you go to it, you see how many millions of dollars they have invested in like a whole host of different funds, right? And I'll explain what these are in a second, right? But so for example, actually, let me explain that now because I think we need to know what that is going forward in order to understand all this. So basically, asset managers like BlackRock or other firms like private equity firms or hedge funds, basically they take big university investments and other investments, and they bundle it into these things called funds, right? And with those funds, they make investments in companies, right? So every one of these things that you see here is a fund, and it's a fund that what University of Washington is invested in, and that's how much it's invested in, right? Where it says commitment, that's the investment, and all of those funds are themselves invested in real estate, invested in energy, invested in any number of things, right? And some of these funds, you can sort of search them and try to find out what they're invested in. Oftentimes you'll find news stories that show this or that fund acquired a stake in a company. Some of them are fully disclosed, like the BlackRock ones, for example, here. I'll talk about that in a second. Also, it's worth noting that you have a lot of people, billionaires that are big donors to groups like APAC that are, might be running asset managers or hedge funds or private equity firms that oversee these funds, right? So I'll just give you one example here, right? Seth Klarman, news stories have come out about him. He's a billionaire that makes big donations to sort of right-wing, pro-Zionist groups. And he oversees the hedge fund Baupost, right? So there's different ways to kind of make connections to different university investments here. I'm going to sort of bracket just for a second, sort of looking at any of these funds right now, because we're going to look at some funds in a second. But suffice to say, you can, and I'll show you how to do it in a second. You can look at some of these funds and try to see like what are their portfolio holdings, and do they have holdings in like weapons companies, right? So we'll get to that in a second. But what I want to do first is also like say that there are also ways to find out whether your university is like directly invested like in company stock. I'm not talking about a fund that indirectly sort of invests in company stock, but like is directly invested in Amazon or whatever company, right? And one way to do that is through the SEC Edgar Database that Molly was just talking about, right? So let me show you that for a second. Now, I'm just going to go here for a second, and I'm going to type in Georgetown University. Now, even though Georgetown isn't like a for-profit corporation, right? Universities are still under some regulations to they have to file certain holdings and investments, right? So when I type in Georgetown, you see this thing that says 13F HR quarterly report filed by institutional managers holdings, right? If you click on filing there, and then you click on the form 13 information table. Wait a second for this to come up. The SEC database can sometimes be a little slow. You see, a bunch of things that Georgetown is invested in, right? You see Amazon, you see the union busting Starbucks, right? You see, including direct stock investment. It also has different fund investments like iShares, right? Range Resources, a big fossil fuel company, so on and so on, right? And you see, column 4 has the dollar amount, column 5 has the share amount. Again, not all universities make these filings, and it's not always, you have to try a lot of different things to search this stuff, right? But this is one way you can find these things, right? I want to also show you one more thing, right? Which is that, universities, even though they are, tax exempt, right? Even tax exempt organizations need to file statements with the IRS. They need to file disclosures with the IRS. Those are called Form 990s, right? Those are basically where they have to disclose things like who's on their board of trustees, who are the main people that are groups that they're contracting to. They also have to disclose things like if they do have certain kind of for-profit partnerships, right, where they're getting income from, they have to disclose those, right? So I want to just give you an example of University of Chicago right here. Let's click that there. When we put in University of Chicago, you see a bunch of entities here. The top one here with the, billions and billions of dollars is obviously, the University of Chicago, right? Or at least one wing of it. And I'm going to go down to where it says here, 990, right? So you can click on view 990 and you'll see tons of information. But I want to go to something more specific here that actually lists different, investments, right? So I'm going to go back 1 year to 2021 where they have a 990T. If you can find your school's 990T, that can often be a gold mine, right? But this information can also be in the regular 990, but it's almost, always in this 990T, right? So this is University, one of their disclosures, one of the most recent ones, right? I'm just going to go down a few pages, right? Here, this is examples of these different income, these different kind of partnerships that the University of Chicago has. Their investment partnerships, right? In all of these that you see here are different funds. A lot of them are fossil fuel funds, right? And so you could take any of those funds and you could search it and you could probably find examples of different companies they're invested in. You even see things in, for the sake of University of Chicago, that they have partnerships with Phillips 66. These are fossil fuel companies, right? But there's some others in here that I remember seeing, Shell, right? So, these are places where you can find things like this too. So all of this is to say that these are the different ways that you can start to find out different direct holdings, different funds that your university is invested in. And, it takes, a few minutes to kind of get the knack of this and learn how to do this. But I promise you that anybody can do this. And the more you do it, the more you start to get better. And of course, LittleCIS and other organizations are always there to, offer, feedback and assistance if you reach out, right? Now, I want to get to this question of how do you connect, funds to the companies in the portfolios of those funds, right? So, again, one way is to just do some obsessive searching, right? Like often you'll find news stories maybe there'll be a press release that says like, Blackstone Fund XYZ or Carlyle Fund XYZ has bought a share in company XYZ, right? And so, just searching the name of the fund with different search terms can often be helpful, right? But I think that a really sort of important and strategic thing that is widely accessible to a lot of people at different universities to tie weapons connections and other companies to your university and define them and expose them is through looking up funds that the university is invested in with big asset managers like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like Fidelity. And the reason is because the portfolios of those asset managers are often public, right? They're often on their websites. So I know that was a lot of words, but I'm going to give you an example right now, okay? So I'm going to go back to the SEC database, right? The Edgar Database, and I'm going to put in Yale University now. There we go. Yale University. I think I saw one or two people from Yale, right? So I'm going to click on Yale's, again, their most recent, holdings statement that they filed with the SEC. Go to the info table. There's not a whole lot here, right? But, one thing that is interesting is you see this iShares, TR, Core, S&P, TTL, STK, a lot of acronyms, right? But if you take this and you copy it, I'm just going to search it. Even if you do it with like quotation marks, right, to get really accurate, it takes you to this ITOT, right? Like this, the fund is the acronym for it is ITOT, right? So I'm going to hold on to that ITOT for a second. So we can see here that this is the fund right here. It's iShares, and iShares is actually something that's owned by BlackRock. So this is BlackRock, right? Now I'm going to just go click on the iShares page, right? Any big asset manager almost always, if they want regular people and people, retirees and so on, to invest in their funds. So they disclose like what their fund is invested in, right? So this is the fund page. Now I'm going to go to holdings. So these are all the companies that the fund is invested in. And I'll filter a list by keyword. I'm just going to put Lockheed Martin, right? So you see here that this fund that Yale is invested in, the fund itself is invested, 0.22% of that fund is invested in Lockheed Martin. And you could find a bunch of other weapons companies, and I'll show you how to do that in a second with the Great Investigate resource, right? But this is like a real kind of crystal clear way that you can say, okay, Yale is invested in this fund, and through this fund, they are invested in Lockheed Martin. And that's something you can like lift up, right? And you can like expose it, and you can say, our university shouldn't be investing in funds that are profiting from, killing children in Palestine, right? Now I want to just get real quick to, this is a way, I'm getting into the weeds here to kind of show you how to like really make it official, right? But there's also easier ways to do this with the Investigate resource. So let me go back to Investigate, right? Now, Investigate, besides being able to look at the company, you can also look up funds, right? So I'm going to put here what I had copied. Here's that ITOT, right? That's the fund that we were just looking at. Search it. Voila. We can click on ITOT here. And so again, this fund that Yale is invested in, you see, all types of things that fund is invested in through the Investigate page, right? A lot of different weapons companies, a lot of different companies that are involved in all kinds of, that are tied to all kinds of injustices, right? So, that's just, ways that you can, start to like research those funds. Another way of thinking about it is that when you see that your university is invested in a fund, it's sort of like on the surface, that's what it says they're invested in. But in reality, they're invested in companies through that fund. And the way that you find out who those companies are is by trying to find out the holdings of that fund. And you can often find that stuff out, through different ways that I just showed you, right? Sometimes you can't, right? I mean, sometimes it might be a fund that's managed by like a private firm, and so there isn't, it's more opaque, but but often you can find a lot of information. So with that, I am going to stop now and pass it back to, I think, to Molly to close it out, and then let Molly take it from there. I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. Actually, Derek, could you share the slides again and go to the next one? Just about resources. Okay, thanks everyone, and thank you, Derek. I know we're at time right now. We'll hang out for a little while longer in case people have questions, but I just wanted to let people know there are other resources we have. LittleCIS.org, like I said, we have a toolkit about research that you can refer to, mapthepower.net. And then if you go to the next slide, Derek, you also can sign up for our newsletter here. We have upcoming trainings about corporate power mapping, and I think dissenters are going to put some next steps that people can do in the chat right now, and we'll send out an email with everything as well. I also wanted to let you know there's like a whole world of people who do research and do work on this that are here to support you all. One of whom runs that awesome Investigate tool that Derek has shown a couple times. And so I just wanted to invite Davi from AFSC just to introduce yourself and let folks know how they can get in touch with you and kind of what supports you all can give folks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly. Nice to be with everyone. Derek provided a really great overview of Investigate, so I won't walk everyone through it again and repeat anything. I just want to add that if folks have questions about how to use the database, how to search those mutual holdings that they find, or have questions about particular companies, our research methodology generally, or additional resources. I saw people drop a few actually in the chat that my program uses at AFSC that we use for our Investigate research, like Who Profits, DeemSay, etc. But if folks have questions about other research resources that they can use, whether for student divestment campaigns or actions that they're planning, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll drop our email in the chat too, but it's investigate@afsc.org. And in addition to working on that Investigate database, I'm a research fellow with the program. So a lot of the research that you'll read on it is company profiles that I and my colleagues have written. But beyond that, Noam and Dove, my two colleagues who couldn't be on this call today, work specifically with student groups like SJP, like JVP, on student divestment campaigns, and are always available to answer specific research questions, answer questions about identifying targets based on what you all find in your own research on your university's endowments. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. I can also share some quick information about two projects that we're currently working on. We're working right now on tracking these weapons companies and weapons used by Israel in its attacks on Gaza since October 7th. That information we haven't published online yet because it is more real-time information than our company profiles that live on Investigate, which are usually updated annually or twice a year. In the next week or so on AFSC's main website, we'll be posting information about those companies' direct complicity in these current attacks, and would be happy to share those updates with folks on the call via email or through you all reaching out to us. And we also will be, we'll be posting research eventually on that real-time tracking and media monitoring that we're doing, but a quicker update will be posted on AFSC's general website that we can share. Again, I'll drop the email in the chat, but if folks have questions about research methodology, specific companies, even if you're doing your own media monitoring or research in news media outlets and have questions about novel weapon systems or companies that you haven't heard of mentioned, feel free to reach out and we can hopefully answer some of those.
Awesome. Thanks, Davi. That's great. And we'll make sure to send along any links and stuff in the follow-up email. Great. And then last, I want to throw it to, I think, someone from Dissenters. I'm not sure who exactly, to share other next steps. Awesome.
Peace, y'all. First off, thanks again for this amazing call. It's been helpful personally, and I know it's helpful for everyone else in here. And yeah, I just want to give some next steps from Dissenters' end, right? So we're going to be launching a training series to lead us into an action cycle and to round out the year. So keep an eye out for our training series on how to plan an action next week, including a divestment 101 training next Thursday, the 30th. So if you want to more on how to launch or sustain a campaign to go with this research, we really hope to see you there, especially if you currently don't have a political home. You're more than welcome at Dissenters, and we're excited to build power with you. So you can sign up for our list to make sure you get those details, or you can follow us on social media. Yeah, we'd be more than happy to have you, and we're really excited to continue building in this very important moment. And I just saw a message. Hey, Christina, what's up? But yeah, that's all on my end. I'm sure y'all will probably be hearing more from everybody after this call. And yeah, shoot us a message, give us a follow, plug into our work, because we're really excited to continue building and make sure that we yeah, take down the war machine, because and you know, take it out one cog at a time, and we'll get there eventually. I'm more than certain of it. Peace, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I think we're a little bit over time, so I think we're gonna close out for today, but I want to thank everyone again. And we'll be following up in case people have additional questions, need extra support. Thanks to everyone for the work that you all are doing, and see you soon.